A legacy isn't something I want to leave. I want to keep mine and I want to live it. I want to live into my legacy right now. So I believe that about a legacy. And I believe that an inheritance in your stuff, we call it the stuff plan. We can talk about that. That's fine. But I'm interested in what does it mean for us to know what our legacy is that isn't this thing that's just money.
Yeah.
And then how do we live into that?
Welcome back to the Hard But Worth It podcast. Today we have another one of our friends here as our guest. Imagine that. And this relationship goes pretty deep. We have John Gardner here, who I know recently as a friend, and not only through Icon coaching, but also through a little bit of time on the golf course.
On the golf course.
I have very little time on the golf course with John.
It's because you're a real business person.
So I'm a newer friend, but some have lots of miles, I guess, on the golf course too. But John, just kind of pull us into your world today. What are you doing now? I think professionally, and even some of your passions that you're running with. And I think out of that, maybe talk to us about what is burning in you right now. Like, what's the thing? If you're going after one thing, if there's a message, a heartbeat, kind of what is the fire right now in your life?
Wow.
It's a big question.
Wow.
And it's open. You can go anywhere with that.
Okay.
There's no wrong answers.
Well, this may be equally as well, but I think I know somewhat of what I want to be when I grow up.
There you go.
Which I've only been 50 for 8 years, so right. And I think my biggest passion has always been to live into something meaningful that has value in my life and others' lives. And so that's always been business for me. But it took the discovery of realizing and admitting out loud and in public frequently that I'm actually not a good businessman. And I got to go there and start there before I could actually become what I wanted, if you will. And so I'm on that journey. I'm on that path.
Yeah.
Give us context for what your business is.
Yep.
We are a human-centered wealth enhancement and wealth architecture company, if you will. In other words, we play with money.
For who? For what kind of your clients?
I think we've narrowed it down now to people in transition is kind of where we shine the most.
Yeah.
There's a way to grow it and go get it and build it and do that stuff. But there comes a point where we want to go use it. We want to go have some fun. We want to know that it's protected. We want to know where we're going to be in 10 years, what's going to happen when we're not here anymore. So we entertain that space a lot. So I would say people in transition between just growth into something other, something more.
So if I was to find a search term that I was going to Google that would be a good search term, what would I
Most people
Google
say the word retirement, pre-retirement, nearing retirement, in retirement.
That's the transition we're talking about. So people who have accumulated some amount of we call it wealth or stuff they've set aside and saved. It could be hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars.
Correct.
And then they come to you to say, okay, now what do I do? And how do I set?
I think things come up to where they realize, like, maybe I don't. My current relationship's been great, but what about taxes? What happens when this thing Medicare happens? What happens when? Oh yeah, I forgot about Social Security. It might not be here. All of those questions start at some point in life for us all, I think.
Yeah.
And we operate in that transition space really well. Help people navigate that season of life. Yeah. We don't like to call it retirement. we like to rename everything. So we like to say it's the best half of our life. What is that going to look like? And we get to play in that money pot, if you will.
Some would also Google the term financial advisor.
That'd be fair.
Financial planner, but you're
wealth management, financial planner.
But you're taking a different edge. I like that.
Estate planning.
Yeah.
Advanced planning. Setting
yourself apart in how you show up, because there's a lot of ways you can engage clients.
Yeah.
I personally think that financial advising, in the most general sense, is some of the most significant work that we can do in people's lives. I mean, I have a great respect. There's some roles where you just get a seat at the table and you get to really speak to and hear some of the most vulnerable, meaningful passions And if you can hold that space well, it's kind of sacred, and moving them to realize some of those dreams that are really deeply embedded. That takes a real gift. Yeah, it does.
Yeah, it's a joy to do it. It's a joy to be in that space, and it's been a lifelong pursuit for me in one capacity or other. So I'm honored to be there.
So what is the why behind that? Like you could have done a few things, but you showed up here.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about why.
Pain.
Yeah.
Just pure pain. And candidly, I grew up in a very industrial community at a different time than today. I grew up in a little company-owned mining town. You can look them up in history books. Right? I think you can. And they really own the whole town.
They do.
And I grew up in one of those, and it's kind of quaint because I've actually only ever met one other human being that's lived in a town like that in all my travels. So I just saw, I love salt of the earth, hardworking. That's how I grew up. But I knew also there was a price to pay for that. Watching bodies, age inappropriately. And it's just a difficult environment. They're hardworking, but it doesn't last long. And I knew that I wanted to, and I've loved learning. I knew I wanted to educate beyond my family's level of educations at the time. And so those are the passions that drove it. I knew what I didn't want. As sad as that might sound, it's a pretty primal motivator when you grow up and you love those people and there's something more. So I've always reached for something more.
Yeah.
How did you know there was something more?
I didn't. How do you know that?
So many people in those environments seem to not do that, I think. Or they repeat patterns because it's a good pattern. It's
Sure.
There's nothing wrong. They repeat, but you didn't.
We've explored this question in my life a number of times, and I don't know. It's one of those I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's just what I do.
I've been tenacious since I was born. I can't remember me as not that. My mom even tells stories about me being naked in cowboy boots climbing a fence at 2.5 years old. So I just guess
I want a photo of that.
Yeah, well, not really. There's
enough.
not very much there. So, I don't know is genuine. I think it just comes from something deep inside of me, something intrinsic that drives me to more. If there's not, I don't want to know about it.
So you started that by talking about pain.
Yeah.
But there's also some curiosity involved in that, right? So that's cool. But what's the pain part of that?
I guess the pain part was to be with people you love and see some of the tragedies that happen along that way in the mining industry. We lost 25 fathers one day in a community that I grew up in the coal mines. And there's just the hard work. And I guess the pain too was that as I got older, I realized that in many regards, they looked like they had given up on life. Like there was just this train and you just got on it and you stared forward like everybody else does, and you bring your lunch pail and your hard hat and you go home and you turn on the nightly news and you eat your dinner and you go to bed and you get up and do it all over again. Yeah. And it just felt like quitting to me in so many regards. So there's just pain around that for me. And then the pain of, not having enough, the pain of I went back to work in those same mines. And that was painful for me to realize, like, oh, as much as I don't want this, as much as I've worked really hard not to be here. I remember the first day swinging a sledgehammer in the copper mine that my great-grandfather, my grandfather, and my father had done the same in. And I'm like, I'm not going here. Yeah. I'm not doing this for the rest of my life. And I did it with an intention, and I turned it into an opportunity to save a lot of money and go start my education the way I wanted to. And I did that. So pretty driven.
Yeah. And then I understand too that there's a deeper relationship between the two of you. So I thought I'd sit in the middle today. Normally we'd have the guest here and we kind of, and it's because I think there's a bit of an overlay in the conversation we can have by bringing you, Kirk, into this from a different perspective, because I think you add some color to John's story. Yeah. Because I think you've done some work too. The little that I know about your story, your first iteration of John, the financial advisor, and how you show up in the business you built, got you a level of success. But at a certain point, you realized that wasn't the version that you wanted. And so that was kind of a stopping point or a transition point. And then you did some work. I think that was about the time you met Kirk, at least on a more professional level, to do some of that work. So I think it'd be fun to just, in the story, ping back and forth, and if you've got embarrassing stories especially, but any stories, but the ones that we'd love to hear those too. But so yeah, you show up in this, and then you're like, okay, this isn't what I want to do. So how did you navigate that, and what was it that led you to realize what you were doing wasn't exactly the way you wanted to do it?
Based on results, right? You can tell a lot about where I am and where I believe I am if you just strip away all the pretense and the ego and just look at what's in front of me, what are the results. And something bad necessarily or terrible, just not what I had expected, not what I wanted to craft. It was, I would probably say this, until a few years ago, several years ago, it was a product of sales cultures, a product of all of that journey for all of those decades. And again, reaching for more. For me, it's just the more thing. It pulls me pretty much every day. But just realizing that if this is all there is, this is like, it's like, wah, 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 it's what a letdown, right? And I knew there's more. So I just began to ask some tougher questions. And then Kirk and I met under two contexts virtually simultaneously. And one was, I am a lover of fish, particularly when I get to kiss them and let them go again. And apparently he likes something similar to that. And so
I like to eat them a little bit more often.
Yes, you do. It's true. It's true. That's fair. Of course, salmon is a different story. But, and the second was I got curious, obviously, about Kirk and what he does. And we chatted. And then one day I just realized, this might be good for me, and then enter existential crisis, and we hit it off on multiple levels. And
what was that existential crisis? How would you describe that now?
I was at a place where I had a partnership, and it was not going well, if you will, and I wanted to show up well through that. And I knew that at some level, for me in leadership, it's on me, right? And I made the choices to get me to that place. And I just knew that I needed help. And I knew that I wanted to reach toward help that I could respect. And that was Kirk at the time.
Yeah. There was that early work we did. I remember experiencing that I remember experiencing the result as actually trying to set the two of you free. It was this partnership. It wasn't producing. It wasn't working. And that's not uncommon. This happens. Right. But there was this entanglement, like this has to work, maybe is the way we were saying it. And it didn't have to work. In fact, it wasn't working.
Right.
And remember, we set up a conversation where we're trying to have this really difficult conversation. And it's hard, and we don't want to. It's kind of like breaking up in a long-term relationship. You just it's coming, but it's longer it takes to talk about it, pushes it off. And we'd set up a conversation, and it was time for you to respond. And I remember you just staring at me. And I'm like, I'm not quite sure what's going on inside, but it looks like he's about to explode. And then what you did was you said, I need to go for a walk. And I'm like, that's probably a really brilliant answer. It was a vulnerable thing to say. Right. And you stood up and you went for a walk. So I was left with your partner in the room, and we're making small talk. You're doing the waiting. And then you walked back in, and you came back in. And again, I don't remember precisely what you said, and it probably doesn't even matter. But you came in clear. Yep. You came in with a voice, and you said what you needed to say. And I'm like, there he is. Yep. And it was the beginning. From my perspective, that marked the beginning of the work.
It's true. Because
we got a deck cleared, we set people free, and then we started to have a very different conversation.
Yeah. Well, so often we face people, including ourselves in our journey, if we were to kind of map it out over these peaks and valleys, there are these ups and then there's these downs. Mm-hmm. And the downs are clarifying moments to what, if we're going to get back on. A lot of times they're off-ramp invitations too, to go, maybe this down is actually a way to get off and into a whole new thing.
Right.
But you talk about more, and this more is a weird word, because depending on what stage we're in and some of those peaks and valleys, more can mean more money. It means more status. more reputation, more external success that we would say, like the things that we get awarded for based on performance, the things we receive. But then for someone who's maybe further down into that road, the more isn't about money. And I'm curious to know, when you say more, what was the more for you?
It's a great question. It had little to do with money. It had to do with quality of life, quality of choices I get to make, and people I surround myself with, and experiences I get to have, and money, and experiences in life, right? My relationship with my kids, my relationships with my wife, my extended relationships, the community that I'm either part of or I'm not part of. It was just more. It was to have, I guess, a textured life as opposed to a smoothly plastered one.
Sure.
That's a nice metaphor.
Yeah. Textured.
Yeah.
That's a good word.
We use this word, like you're saying, just say, I want more.
Yeah.
And I think in early stage in our life, it has a pretty precise definition around some pretty obvious success metrics. How or in what way, how did you make a shift to where it went from, we'll just say, money to texture? What was that journey like for you?
I think it was the courage that it takes to be really aware, aware of me or aware of others, aware of a broader world around me. I think that was probably the biggest part. It was a willingness to open up my awareness, because it was easy for me to be a big fish in a really small pond.
Yes. So describe for us in one metaphor what you were like before this transition.
A really big fish in a really big small pond.
What's his name?
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting story, right? So he is normally just this unassuming, casual, until the moment, and pufferfish pops out. There he goes, right?
So pufferfish, right? These little guys that swim around, they get real big.
You and I discovered a character we now know to be pufferfish.
Yes.
Puff Daddy.
He shows up.
It doesn't quite work that way.
No.
Yeah, pufferfish it is.
And what does that mean in the lived experience? What are some examples? How does pufferfish show up?
Pufferfish came from a lot of deep work, a lot of reflection, a lot of help from a lot of good people. And I realized that it came from a place in my life that was difficult. And it was the self-preservation side of me. It was, you don't know what you don't know, and you develop mechanisms. And mine was pufferfish. Because if you go really big and really over the top with stuff, it generally tames the rest of the environments around you. Yeah. So it either scares off who needs to be scared off, and bites, it keeps a lot of predators away. And I just learned it somehow very young. And it carried very thematically through my life. And I finally was able to, we have fun with pufferfish today.
Yeah.
And I talk about them all the time because it's been meaningful to my wife, to my kids, to our business colleagues, to friends.
The problem with self-protective mechanisms like that is not that they don't work.
Oh, they work.
They work. It's that they assume everyone's a predator.
Right.
So pretty soon you're puffer fishing everyone.
People you care about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the alternative story to pufferfish?
The journey led to, I actually have this to this day, since this moment, actually. I have a sticker that says, the stickers that say, hello, my name is?
Yeah.
And it says, Gently John.
Yeah.
Because quintessentially, who I am at my core is loving and gentle.
Yeah, that's good.
And so I got to be that who. And now pufferfish, and I would caution anybody in this world to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Pufferfish is not bad. And there's a necessary part to that at some level. So they both exist in my life. Yeah.
How does that now that, because I'm glad you brought that up, because it's very easy to call these self-protective mechanisms bad, and then we got to go out and kill them, and no.
I enjoy pufferfish.
Yeah. I enjoy provoking him.
So, yes.
It's super fun.
Especially on the golf course. There he
got
is.
him.
There he is.
I get a point. But how does this dynamic now between what we're going to call pufferfish and Gently John play out when you interact with clients? How does it affect your ability to sell?
Oh, in profound ways. Before it was pufferfish is prove it. Let's prove it, John. So pufferfish in the office, look like? Prove it. I'm going to prove to you how smart I am, or how good we are, or how my algorithms are better than the next person. And it really isn't about emotion. And that guy, that's Pufferfish in the Office, was Prove It John. So if we need another character, Pufferfish disguises himself as Prove It John.
Yeah.
Right?
Super competent, super smart, has all the charts and graphs.
Resting
can
confidence
talk through
voice.
everything.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
how does Gently John show up and sell?
Open. I think I can be with people just to be with people rather than have anything to prove. It's an agenda very, very loosely held. And I think it's the quality of our life, I currently believe, at least to some degree, many degrees, is determined by the quality of the questions I'm willing to ask myself and dare to answer. That's kind of my measure now.
Yeah. It's a fascinating thing to consider because the financial industry is so highly regulated.
Yep.
And, federally and local state, the compliance around it, it's a really tight ship.
Yep.
And so there's a level of needing, like, I think there's a level of assurance that a consumer client wants to have to know that my advisor does have the credential and they know the game. You can't just show up and fake it. But while that might get you in the door, the thing then that keeps you there isn't the credential. It's the gentle get to know you, have the conversation, and understand the story. Because I think where so many in the financial industry can miss the mark is it's like what gets you in the door isn't necessarily the thing that keeps you in the door. And somewhere the conversation has to shift from I know all the good things and I'm going to tell you how to do, from the expert to I'm going to become an expert of you. I'm going to listen to you and allow you to shape the strategy, because now I'm trying to get to the heart of things. And that feels like an easy thing to do, but it feels really difficult for a lot of people to make that transition. It sounds like that's some of the work that you did, and now that's showing up more in your engagement with clients.
It's accurate. Yeah. I mean, there's a competency, sure.
Right.
I think the funny thing about standards is sometimes I think it's this aspirational, and my understanding of a standard is it's minimally acceptable. Right. And so there's a standard, there's a test you pass. There's
it's the minimum.
There's math you know how to do. You understand some things about how an economy works, right? Those are aptitudes. And that doesn't make a financial advisor, in my opinion. Now, having been through that cycle, I think there's a cycle where you have to gain that. But the conversation is not interesting there. It's boring. It's math and algorithms and charts. And last time I checked, we aren't those things.
Yeah.
We're very human. Even the analyst sorts or engineers, we're human. We feel. And when you can elevate a practice, in my opinion, to that place, it's not easy to do, but it's definitely worth it. It's definitely meaningful for me. And there's evidence that it's meaningful for the people we serve.
So I want to tell a story that to me accentuates or exemplifies this conversation we're having around the financial world and how it kind of works sometimes, and how pufferfish or that confident voice can show up in it. And it happened during the first couple of years when we were working together and we're going through this process where, as one does, you set goals, right? Goals are fantastic. I love goals. They're great. But goals are revealed through behavior, and they're often stated early on, and then behavior follows, right? So you'd set a goal, and we'd have a big number. We're gonna have a big number this year. We're gonna just kill it and crush it. And I didn't know about pufferfish yet at the time. I'm like, okay, great, big goals are fantastic. Let's go crush it. That'll be awesome. I'm not opposed to that. And then the halfway through the year, we're not quite on goal, and but we try harder, right? We're just gonna really show up, and I started to get this tone of this overconfidence, but not necessarily. The behavior wasn't there. And then we get to the end of the year. Well, it all happens in the fourth quarter anyway. So here we go, right? And then we do our year-end review and be like, okay, so did we hit the number? And the answer was no. Oh, worthless. I'm terrible. But we're going to crush it next year. And hang on. And so what I'd say is, well, what did we do? And we started to make lists of what you'd accomplish in the year. And it was things like you were getting healthier and you were finding your voice, and you were discovering this about yourself. And that awareness you were talking about was really coming alive. I'm like, that's awesome. Your relationship with your wife was going through these great transitions. You and your kids were, cool stuff was going on. And we'd make this, well, that's all great stuff, but it wasn't the goal. So, okay. I'm glad that happened, but okay, what's our goal for next year? Big number again. You remember this?
I remember it slightly differently, but that's close enough.
Well, fill in this.
No, I'm kidding. I was totally kidding. Yes, I remember this.
Yeah, okay, I get it.
And then we translated that into, or I did at least, and I said, okay, I need a minute. I need to go get the CEO out of his office to bring him in here to talk to the senior vice president of sales, because
it's all going on in your
Houston,
head.
we have a problem.
This office is in your brain.
Yeah, and the interesting distinction, I use that to this day.
Yeah.
It's that, in the transition, I made reference earlier that business ownership as opposed to something other. And that other for me is I had to admit out loud that I was self-employed. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
I've had a wonderful life. I've been in my kids' lives growing up, and there's tremendous value there. But there was always this aching toward entrepreneurship or business, and I'm none of those things. And I've always wanted to build something that's saleable. Candidly. And I've always built something where all roads lead to me. And that was the distinction. And that was part of this journey over these years. It's been, okay, do I really want that? And then for a year and a half, it was, no, I'd really rather go play golf.
Right.
That's that was
we
good.
Discovered is on this journey, I watched you let go of this.
Yeah.
And one can never tell if one lets go of it or of the big goal, or if they let go of the way they're holding it. And there's a difference there. And I watched you set it down.
Right.
And look at what you were actually doing.
Right.
And going, actually, the results I'm producing in my life are exactly what I want right now.
It's true.
I want that. And then you owned it, and it became the goal. And then we had a moment when we were still meeting, and I looked at you one day and said, John, you look happy. And you said, I am.
Yeah.
Go be happy.
Yeah.
And that's where that part of our work stopped. And a year of golf formed.
I would submit paused, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, we paused, and we intentionally did that. And it was great.
Right.
It's absolutely, I wouldn't trade that. It was the best decision for me and me alone, which is an interesting conversation, but I wasn't making that decision for the benefit of my family or my wife it was for me.
Yeah.
And
it was one of those places where we watched you dig deep.
Yep.
And I watched you set aside a set of principles or ideas or cultural norms that had to be the right answer and go, wait, no, what do I want?
Yep.
And you did a deep learning process that wasn't easy. It was, well, I'd let you fill in the version of what it actually was, but it was deeply meaningful.
And I would call it that. It was meaningful. It was mine too. It wasn't, it wasn't like I put on somebody else's armor and I've got all these rough spots now. Forgive the analogy, but I just got naked,
right,
and ran around for a little while till I figured out what my armor looks like. What does a suit that fits me look like? And I think I have a better idea of that, and I think I get to keep learning that for the rest of my life. But there certainly is a different place, or I guess that work is valuable to me. Some people would talk about it being a dark spot or whatever, maybe, but for me, it's a valuable place. It's something that I don't ever get to give away. It's mine forever, and it gets to grow, even though it's difficult at times. It's challenging at times, but it's challenging in all the right ways. It's that type of resistance that makes you stronger, not defiant.
And that's one of the differences between where we started, the story I told at the very beginning, when the partnership and the business and all that stuff, that was very much a feeling of, I need out of this situation. Please help me get out. And fair enough, we did. Yeah. This deep, this hard, you're not trying to get out of anymore.
No.
In fact, it seems like it's a thing that is propelling you into new spaces. And recently you've been picking up that big number dream again. And this time when we talk about it, I experience you holding it very differently.
Yes.
Very differently. How would you describe the difference in how you're holding it, held it then versus holding it now?
I think that there's self-accountability, this idea of accountability. A lot of people hire people to be accountable. And I just realized that for me, I don't want to speak for everybody, accountability, it's a completely inside job. I can't figure out how it's an external job. I don't know how you can hold me accountable, if I'm being
Punishment
honest.
and reward systems.
Right. But I mean, that's not very useful for me.
It's not that
It doesn't have any value for me for you to go, you said you were going to do this.
And now you have to wear a Christmas
There's
sweater
something
all
more.
of June.
Again,
Yeah,
here we are with
right.
more, right? Me and more. Me and more.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's that I realize like, oh, I'm looking for something outside of me that I'll never find outside of me.
Hmm.
It only exists inside of me. And so now my CEO is a lot happier with my senior vice president of sales.
That's right.
So
And we
numbers
know
are
you're
better.
serious in part because it's less time on the golf course. That's right.
That has been happening.
Well, I think that's an anomaly. I think a world does exist where there's and both.
Yes,
And
there is.
I am highly motivated to
there you
prove
go.
that
That's
That's
right.
right.
But in the moment,
because I
you're-
did get to go play Pinehurst in the midst of even this.
That's true. That is true.
There you go.
But you are in a build cycle right now.
We are.
Right.
We are in that very transition we talked
Yeah.
about a minute ago.
And build requires effort and time.
It does.
It's the getting from 0 to 60 miles an hour. I don't care if you get 40 miles a gallon. During that period, you're getting about 10. Maintaining 60 doesn't cost as much. Right. And you're in one of those momentum building times. And I think when the momentum is built and going,
yeah.
the golf course becomes available. again.
Well, and there is an and both. I'm still honestly, I'm desperately working at that. Meaning, like, I still grab a club and go to the simulator, right? Instead, I take a 2-hour lunch,
Right.
and I can go hit golf balls on a simulator and play Pinehurst again, or I go out and chip and putt for a while, or I'm learning that it gets to be life, the things that I love in life. It's the people, and then there's the things, and there's a couple of things I love, and that's fishing and golf.
Yeah.
And and both. You know, I got to float the bighorn, and we're growing, and I'm putting in the
What
hours.
does float the bighorn mean for people who don't know?
The Bighorn is
lot
a
of-
beautiful river in Montana.
Yeah.
It's 13 miles of
And you float it with a fly rod, right?
fly rod and a boat.
Is that the town Bighorn as well? Or is it just a...
No, it's
just
on
the
a
river?
Crow Indian reservation, native reservation. Out in the middle of Montana, you drive out in the middle of nowhere.
There you
There's
go.
a fly shop and a bunch of guides, and you jump in a
Yeah.
boat. And
So one of my favorite questions to ask that I want to ask right now is, when you sit in your seat where you're sitting right now and you look back in time to that John from, I don't know, however many years ago, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, there was something he didn't know that you know now. And if you could go back and tell him something, say, buddy, this is it, learn this, what would you tell him?
I would tell him that he's safe. I would tell him that gentleness is far more powerful than a lot of other options. And that I think safe sums it up for me. I think a lot of what was born of me young was my experience of this world wasn't very safe. And everybody gets to go do their own work and their own journey. But for me, it was that. It was, if it was going to be, it's definitely up to me. And always put your back in the corner and pay attention to the angles. It's just the environment that I thought was normal. And only to discover it doesn't have to be normal, right? It's certainly not ideal.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and this is the Hard But Worth It podcast. And we're talking about how do we get to worth it,
Yeah.
which is also the premise of Icon Coaching, since you founded it, 12 or more years ago. So embedded in the sound of Icon Coaching is this theme of intrinsic, finding the why that's worth it. And some people never make that journey. And that's okay. Like we're not here, but we recognize that those who are willing to make that journey have to go usually deeper, right? There's a level where what we're talking about is you can hit a level of up in life by going up. And it's up, skills, aptitudes. And it is, you look up, you grow up, you get promoted. There's a point where that plateaus, and that is a pretty much plateau. You might make more money, but the dimension of more, which you're talking about meaning, at some point you have to look down to go up.
Yeah.
And that's a paradigm shift, because you begin to look in places that are vulnerable. They cost you something. It's you know, sometimes it's going back to stories that were like, okay, this was helpful here, but this is now limiting me here. So what do I do? So how did you confront that as part of your transition? Because you're talking about some deep things,
Mm-hmm.
and people listening in are like, okay, how do I apply that? You had to go deep and confront some things and make some decisions to go, am I going to play in this space? But because you said yes, you talk about that's a sacred, protected place that you don't want to give it up.
That's right.
You know, give us a bit of context into that.
I think contextually, as you were talking, there was one story back at us, if you will, one lesson, if you will, or one thing that I carry with me to this day from the work that we've done and are doing is there's this distinction that there's some things in life that require confidence, but there's these other things in life that require courage.
Mm-hmm.
And they're wildly different things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'd been living in the confidence realm pretty well.
That's great language.
And so, and I remember when Kirk said it to me, because it just struck me. And it's one of those things where I didn't have to write it down. I have to do a quote by Kirk at Icon. It's in me. It's part of me. I get to own that now. Yeah. And so I'm frequently now overlaying into my life. Am I living my life into the courageous spots? Because I'm pretty full with the confidence spots. I kind of, I'm okay with that.
And if you're
that's my normal
on the Enneagram, that's even, you know, more exaggerated.
Yeah. And so for me, it's am I living, and that's the texture of life. That's the more that I'm talking about. If I could define it any way, it would take that and say, I'm living more into those courageous parts of my life.
So now take that, the idea of safe. You're safe. When I think about courageous places,
right,
they're not precisely safe. They're people who exhibit courage. They look on the outside fearless, we'll say. They might look that way, but they're not. What they are is they're still scared. They're just doing it anyway.
Yeah.
How does the safety that you've discovered apply in places or in this courage concept?
That's great. I love this. I love the juxtaposition of it. I guess if I had to boil it down to safe in that courageous conversation, I think it's because I don't know that it's that I didn't trust the world at its deepest core. I think for me, I discovered that I really didn't trust me at my deepest core.
Right.
And once I realized that I'm trustworthy of myself, if you will, maybe we're way out in the moon, but it's okay. I think it's that. You can put me in any environment now because I've learned to trust the one I'm with forever. Yeah. I trust me.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I could have said that 7 years ago.
Often we hear people being encouraged to love themselves. Like the journey is to love yourself. And that is a journey. And
I love me.
Yeah. But trust is another version of saying that. It's a very different texture on that. And if you don't trust yourself, this courage question becomes terrifying.
Right. That's true.
Yeah.
We one of our core values at Icon, and we frame it as safety third, which is a way of describing what we're doing. And what that means is just simply there's a way in which you need to engage the concept of safety so that you can go do dangerous things.
That's right.
And when people put safety first, they have a tendency to avoid the dangerous things.
Right.
Safety third is right. But I trust myself in this dangerous space.
Yes.
It's awesome.
I do not trust myself not to make a mess. Right? I mean, at times, right? Sometimes things can get messy. I'm not going to run from something that might get messy anymore, but not because I have confidence. It's because I trust me enough, even in the midst of messy, that gives me the courage to enter it.
And now what kind of spaces is that opening up for you?
Oh man, everything's everything's moving really fast.
Uh-huh.
And it's colorful and it's textured.
So bring us up to speed.
Well, it's just even the numbers, they're much different. I mean, they're still pretty big numbers, but they're there and they're being hit consistently. It's the letting go of control, bringing on new humans and building something that ends up getting so out of my control.
So all roads don't lead to John anymore.
No, they're
Do any roads lead to John?
Well, they do currently. The puppet master still has a string or two connected, but I'm pretty sure those are going to get clipped. But we've gone from repositioning everybody, bringing in 4 humans at the same time, establishing the process engineering of our business is where we're at right now. And we have some good models and have some great help. And so it's all of those things. And it's all ever since probably several months ago, I decided, okay, golf is great. Kiss and Fish is great. And we're going to do this thing too.
Yeah.
So
one of the ways this shows up, the idea of letting go of control and trust. When you're out in these new spaces, you are letting go of the engineering of your business. And one of the things I've heard you say before is that it has to be hard. If it's not hard, it's not interesting. And so that mindset makes everything hard, which probably makes everything complicated.
yeah.
And one of the things I see you doing right now is you are accepting that some things are just repeatable. They don't need to be re-engineered. We don't have to have the best idea again and again and again.
Well, and if I could add, I'm fascinated that there's a group of human beings who get absolute pleasure and enjoyment out of these things that I think are evil.
Which are
the checklist world of got 19 things that they feel like they're going to kill me.
Right.
And they love it. And I'm like, wow, we live in an amazing place.
Yeah.
Thank God all roads don't lead to me.
Right.
And I think it's the texture conversation that's let me just let go and go pro, if you will. It's that journey of going pro. That Pressfield
And so
book
we're routinely hitting numbers now.
Routinely, yeah.
Right.
I mean, we smashed the last ones.
Right. Very, very different experience.
Nice.
Yeah.
So we'll say in the pre going deep world, we had big dreams and big numbers and big aspirations driven by pufferfish.
Yeah.
And we didn't trust ourselves. We didn't trust the world.
Right.
And I've got to believe that aroma, we'll call it, showed up in your sales meetings.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, Mr. Prover. Remember, this is pufferfish's cousin.
And so now when you're sitting down with people, it's back to this question. It seems very obvious to me that this journey you've gone on, this going deep, this finding your voice, finding you in the process, trusting you, which can feel like, how does that apply to sales technique and practice, right? Those don't connect.
Yeah.
But it seems as though the results would say they do.
But I would answer it this way. I believe in resonance. I believe that we can intuit a great deal. And whether, you can cross all the T's and dot all the I's and say all the right things and come from a place of your being, if you will, or your humanity that has a tone that isn't spoken. It's just perceived. It's just felt. And I think you can't disguise that. I think it tells on you.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of that hard is it.
And so the resonance of the sales process today.
The resonance of who I am is when I think it's just closing the is and the ought. It's closing this gap, this chasm between the shooting on myself. It's all of that stuff. Please, for everybody listening, don't shoot on yourself.
It's really messy.
It's not good.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think this is what the consumer, you can feel it when you're sitting with somebody. You're gonna go buy a car.
Yep.
Right. Anyone who walks on a car lot is there to buy. They want to buy a car. No one does that for the fun of it, as best I can tell. Right. And so the salesperson knows this person's probably going to buy a car in the next 30 days.
Yeah.
But you can feel it from people. It's like, I don't want to buy a car from you. Like,
Yeah. I'm sure if you go out on the internet and you looked up human-centered in the name of a business, you'd find a lot of them. And I say it frequently. And I've noticed that there's something resonating because when I say it, you can tell it's received. Like people understand, intuit, here's the best tool or tactic or strategy.
Yeah.
Right? Because, I mean, that's transactional.
It is.
And a human-centered company doesn't sound transactional to me.
Yeah.
And so we've truly clicked into that. And I think it's because it's genuine. It's authentic to who I am as a representative of the company that I'm building. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of resonance there.
And that resonance is magnetic too. It's sticky. It sucks them. It's what we're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. And it attracts who needs to be attracted. And the other thing is that, interestingly, it's as much as I would tell you, I'm not trying to be all things to all people. You could have called BS on that and you'd have been absolutely right, because my audience had to be everybody.
Yeah, and that's nobody.
You know, we talked about Pinky and the Brain earlier. That was my philosophy in life for a long time. What are we doing? Same thing we always do. We're taking over the world.
Yeah.
And you know, this is all settled down.
That's the thing about magnetic, right? You flip them around and they were repellent.
Exactly.
So, sorry. Am I hearing you say then that one of the shifts you made too is that you narrowed your client profile? It's not everyone, but you know who it is. Yeah. So that means not everyone is a perfect fit customer for
absolutely
you.
Not.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the tools, tactics, and strategies, and you know, if you're DIY in it, you know, great, do that. That's great, good. Mm-hmm. What we're also not is just going to tell you here's the 9 things you need to do. We're interested in the humanity of it. We're interested in the living of it. We talk about, you know, this whole legacy conversation comes up, and our industry uses it, and it drives me bananas because I think it's lost its way. And for us, a legacy isn't something I want to leave. I want to keep mine, and I want to live it. Mm-hmm. I want to live into my legacy right now. Mm-hmm. So I believe that about a legacy, and I believe that an inheritance in your stuff, we call it the stuff plan. We can talk about that. That's fine. But I'm interested in what does it mean for us to know what our legacy is that isn't this thing that's just money. Yeah. And then how do we live into that? Mm-hmm. And then I get to play in the money pot to help that come about.
So if you were talking to someone who's going into this field, right? They've got 3 to 5 years under their belt. They've come through the first sort of wave of vetting. You know, they got some confidence they're going to make it work, right? But if you were talking to that person and had an hour with them, and then you boiled that down to just a minute here, what would you say? What do they need to know about this process you're describing?
I would say that financial acumen is not enough, and learn, as cliche as it is, learn your voice. Know who you are, and unapologetically go live into it with everything you got. And that business will flourish. Mm-hmm. I would say narrow, don't broaden. Mm-hmm. And I would say show up and play hard. Have fun.
What I love about that advice is it applies to most endeavors, in fact. The idea that you do need to learn the skills. Yeah. You gotta have the basic competency, but that's the standard that gets you in the game.
Yep.
Right. But we like to say that the means of production, or how value is created in the modern economy, is increasingly about showing up yourself. Yeah. You are the product. And if you don't know what the product is, you only know what the wrapping is, it's not going to work. And in your world, the wrapping is the charts and graphs and math, and it's great. But you're the product, and you've got to figure out who that guy is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, it's literally that human-centered. Mm-hmm. It's through my own journey. It's through, you know, I think that there's a number of things in life where we talk about behavior, right? It's a Gandhi quote that I love talking about. It's not exact, but he was asked by reporters, what are your values? And they said, if you want to know what I value, put down your cameras and follow me around for a year. Mm-hmm. And it's that premise, right? That's wisdom, right? And I don't think any of the reporters followed him around for a year, just for the record. But yeah, and I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, that's good. So John, I love that Gandhi quote. I've heard you say that before, and it makes me realize that we're sitting in a room with a bunch of cameras around us.
Yeah.
And I told a story earlier about our work together, where at the beginning of the year we'd hear one thing, but then we'd see another, and we got those aligned. And you're picking those old dreams up now. And so I'm curious, if we were to shut all these cameras off and just follow you around for a year, this next year, what would we see?
I walked right into that one, didn't I?
You did.
I did. Well, I can hope.
Yeah, it's predictive is all.
Yeah. I think you would get to see pufferfish at least come out and wag his tail a little bit and wink, go back. I think you get to see gently John mature. I think you get to see someone who is failing well. I think you get to see me learn to salsa dance with my beautiful wife. I think you get to see, I hope that you get to see for a deeper reconciliation with my kids and my family. You get to see a business owner. You get to see someone who has a community that supports him and a community that he supports. You would see contribution, meaningful contribution into the things I love. And you would see someone very much alive, very much alive. Yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you, John, for giving us an hour of your time. And we appreciate you sharing just some of the deep things that come from those deep wells that you're digging. And we're grateful for that. And if you've enjoyed watching this video, we want to ask you to like it, to comment if there's anything you want to say regarding just some of the deeper work, or maybe just say hi to John here. But we do appreciate you listening to us. Share it if you would. And we'll see you next time here at the Hard But Worth It podcast.